Okay, part 2 of 3, let's say. The Moonrise tour, Com-Pac 33. Now we're in the cockpit. So let me talk a little bit about this. A little grungy, but this boat, the VHF, is actually out in the cockpit. There's a speaker only down below, and then we hook a hand microphone, what do you call it, a hand mic out here. But VHF is old and tired and needs replacing, and then when we do, we'll have a remote out here and probably the main unit down below. Fuel gauge, that little doodad is for a manual pump. Let's see, before I go back there, we'll talk about the order. We'll start in the back at the stern. Backstay, like I mentioned on the previous video, swim ladder in the stern. Propane bag, this is where how you should always store small propane bottles. Never store propane bottles in a boat because propane is heavier than air, and if they developed a leak for some reason, the propane would just ooze down into your bilge and you'd have a cloud of propane down there, which is a risk of explosion, so you don't want that. So always store bottles out in the open here. This boat, interestingly enough, does not have a propane locker, which you would normally have out here as well, because the oven and the stove is alcohol rather than propane. We'll see that when we go down below. Already mentioned the dinghy. There's not too much to say. It's fiberglass bottom, good dinghy. Let's see. This is the middle here is where the helm seat would go if it was installed, but we have one more layer of gloss to put on there. The cockpit is sort of a T, I guess what you'd call T style, so it's easy to step around. Let me step back here without stepping on too many things. Now that the seat is out, I guess we can see that it's access. There's 2 scuppers there that drain the cockpit. You want to be able to quickly drain water from a cockpit in case of a flooding or following seas or something breaking into the cockpit. So these scuppers are rather large and they should quickly drain the cockpit. Which brings up a good point. You should probably good sailors would do a cockpit draining test. Plug the scuppers, fill your cockpit, and then time how long it takes to drain. Just a good data point. The spinning hatch there is access to emergency tiller, or actually access to the top of the rudder post where you would put the emergency tiller. What else to say? I like this a lot. The sides here tilt up, so when you're heeling, it's easy enough to stand with your foot over here, brace yourself. The helm seat is nice too because it's curved. It's kind of a nice seat. Let's see, while we're here, we'll take off some of these covers. So we have a fairly dated chart plotter, old Raymarine C80 here, which still works great. Instruments are tied into it, plus the radar, and it's got navigation software. So this is where you do navigation and radar. We tend to often use an iPad running Navionics, and that's what this little cloth is. We'll bolt the iPad up here when we're running, just because I like the interface better. You can zoom, just 2-finger zoom. Old Raytheon autopilot, which again works just great. Autopilots are a necessity on a boat like this, so we tend to use it quite a bit when we're sailing. It's fun to steer, but at some point, depending on where you're going, how long it's going to take, you just want to not sit at the wheel all day. So flick on the autopilot, and this autopilot is set up to just hold a course, magnetic course. It's not wired up to hold a course with relative to the wind, which would be a good thing, but very, very old data marine primary instruments, so wind speed and direction in the middle, and then water depth and speed through the water. But we're in the process of upgrading this, so we'll get all new B&G instruments. And then binnacle compass. It's every sailor's best friend. Nothing special about that. On this boat, this is the shift, just forward, reverse, and the throttle. Nothing fancy. Nice big wheel, and there's the autopilot clutch, I guess you call it. on the wheel. Apparently the wheel's not centered, or the rudder's not centered. Now it is. Engine gauges down there, nothing excited. It's universal M4-30, so 30 horse. Very low miles on it now. What are we at? We're at 560, I think, which is fairly low for a diesel this old. So it's like a grandma's car. The little switch you see there, that's the Maxwell. That's the master, or the up-down switch for the windlass. And then we also have a remote control for the windlass, so you can. I think I generally don't use this one. I generally have the remote around my neck and use that for the up-down. And then switch below it is, if you can see it, a blower, which really you don't need a blower on a boat with a diesel. Blower is more for gasoline boats to vent fumes. But the engine compartment is so airtight that it tends to get kind of humid down there, so we installed a blower just to be able to push a bunch of air through, and then that sucks air, pulls air into the engine compartment and blows it, and we've got 2 vents on the transom on the exterior back there. So I think that's all for here. That little thing with the missing handle is actually a cockpit shower. I've never actually used it, but it just pulls water from the freshwater tank, and there's a little shower head there, and you can take a little shower out in the cockpit. It's very handy. Let's move forward, then we'll look at the two lockers here. So, what's interesting on this boat, we have the sort of the standard lazarette on the starboard side. These little latches are tricky because if you were to climb in there and not do something other, protect yourself, and this closed on you, when it closes they tend to latch. So if you were down in there, you would be trapped. Alright, we'll try this again. The video got unexpectedly cut off, so we're going to continue with our cockpit tour. We're looking into the starboard side lazarette. It's another great term on a boat, lazarette. Boats have great names for everything. But if anybody's been on a sailboat before, they know these lazarettes tend to be huge and deep, and you can climb down in there. You can't really get a sense of the scale here, but you can easily stand down in there and just your head will be sticking up. So the waste tank's down there. All these lines, you can't really see it, but the engine's down behind the lines. And lazarettes are just a place to put everything, all your miscellaneous stuff. So we've got spare anchor, seats, lines, boat pole, cleaning supplies, just a variety of things down there that sit in a big pile. You can't really build structure in here because you need to get in there to service the engine, which is also a pain. Climb in there, you end up doing what we call boat yoga, which is bending your body into unbelievable angles and contortions to try to do normal things like check the oil. Small thing, you can see this big stainless steel rod. That's the emergency tiller. Needs to be handy, ready to go. So if the steering were to go out, we have emergency tiller. We pull this helmsman's seat off, access the little open little panel, and hook the tiller in there, which is something I haven't tried on this boat, but probably should try. So that's the starboard lazarette. And when we're underway, it's all latched down. Cockpit's rather large. It's filled up right now with the seat since we're doing the staining, but there's good room in here. You know, you could easily have 6 adults in the cockpit, not feel cramped. Now the port side, we don't have a lazarette because we have an aft cabin immediately under this part of the cockpit, so somebody be sleeping down there. But what that means is, the nice thing is that this, let's see if I can do this one-handed. This port side locker is a shallow locker. It's only about maybe 8 inches deep. So that's super handy because there's just, again, a lot of little things that we have for the boat that are easy to get to. They don't disappear down into the depths of the big lazarette. So that's a feature I really like a lot. It's a place accessible in the cockpit for things like winch handles and chafe guard and all that sort of stuff. Sail ties. Alright, so now let's take a look under the Dodger. Again, one nice thing about this boat is the Dodger protects you mainly when you're sailing. It keeps the spray out of the cockpit, but also protects the companionway, so you can have this open without being worried about getting water down there. So let me back up just a minute to say we have two primary winches for the jib sheets. What are these? Lumar 40s, 2-speed self-tailing, beautiful winches. Just serviced that one, re-lubed it last season, and we need to do the other ones. And then we have two secondary winches here for halyards and sheet. What are these? Lumar 16s. 1-speed, but self-tailing, which is nice. Two hatches here. These hatches end up being port side hatch, goes into the aft cabin, port side aft cabin. Starboard side hatch leads into the head parens bathroom parens. So as I mentioned in the first tour, everything's led aft into the cockpit on this boat, so you do everything from here, except the only real thing you go forward for when you're underway is when you're dropping the main. You go forward with some sail ties, and you drop it from here, and then you go forward and pull it down and just throw some sail ties temporarily around it to secure it. But it does fall into the lazy jacks, so it doesn't really go anywhere. I love these these are little rope clutches. Everything comes through a rope clutch, and then as needed, if you need purchase on something like the halyard to be an obvious one, you throw it around a winch, crank it up. For non-sailors, halyards are the uppy-downies. That raises the sail. Main halyard raises the main. Let it loose, it'll drop. Topping lift holds the end of the boom up, which we don't use too much because we have a boom vang, which is the stiff rod that holds the boom up. First reef point, again, if you pull in tight, it's going to tighten up on the reef and not allow the sail to go higher. So the idea of reefing is reduce the sail area. So we hold the bottom of the sail down, and then once we secure the reef point, we tighten the halyard on it, and then we have less sail up. So we have two reefs. Reef 1 is the lower one, which means cut out maybe a third of the sail, and then reef 2, if you tighten that one down, you cut out maybe another third, so you're down to just a third left of the sail. Boom vang, again, we don't futz with that too much. That's tension on the boom vang. Then over here we have the second reef, the main sheet. So again, for non-sailors, halyards are uppy-downy lines, raised sails. Sheets are inny-outy lines. You let the sails in, out, or in while they're raised. So the main sheet is for the mainsail. The jib sheets, there's two jib sheets. They both come back to the cockpit, to the main winches back there. And depending on what side of the boat the jib is on, one of those will be active, which means there's tension on it, and you can let the jib out or pull it in using the jib sheet on the winch. But the main sheet do from here. The way these works are a little old and stiff, but you release tension this way. So now I can, if there was wind, that could pull free, or I could pull it back in and then tension it when I get it to where I want it. We have a spinnaker halyard on this boat, but we haven't flown a spinnaker. We have an asymmetric foresail, which we haven't used yet. We don't have a spinnaker proper, but it's good to have a separate halyard, so we could use that for pulling somebody up the mast if the main halyard were to get stuck up there or something. We have this other one, and the jib halyard, of course. So because this boat has roller reefing, the jib stays raised all season, and then it's just furled, wrapped around the forestay rather than dropped like the main. So the jib halyard stays in place all season. We don't touch this because we pull it to raise the jib in spring and then drop it in the fall. And then again, we're not using the spinnaker halyard at all. So it just sort of stays there. It's tied off. You can see it tied to one of the stanchions up there, the blue flecked. But again, this is nice. I like having everything led aft. There's trade-offs, of course. There's more friction in the system, and there's a lot of extra line on the boat because everything comes back here. But it's nice to be able to do stuff mostly from back here. And people say, well, you know, then what if you get into trouble, then you have to go forward. Well, if you don't have it all lit aft, that's what you're doing anyway. So if something gets jammed, you go forward just like you would if you didn't have it lit aft. So that's sort of a best of both worlds in my opinion. We've got sailbags. We just stuff. I like sailbags. At first I thought it's messy. I'd rather coil lines and have them hanging, but it works well enough. You just sort of loosely flake the line and put stuff in the sailbags. That works fine. That's about all I have to say from the cockpit. Oh, I guess as we're saying, the Dodger has two zippers here, so we can roll up this this front piece if we want to bring more air into the cockpit, and then also it gives us access to Traveler, which are the two lines on the boats, the two working lines, other than the jib sheets that are not run through these rope clutches. So Traveler just allows us to move the car on the Traveler there, I should say the Traveler control lines, move the car on the Traveler to adjust the position of the little car that's the base of the main sheet there. So we have two Traveler lines that go through two jam cleats there. I think now that's it. Okay, so I will reconvene down below for part 3 for the interior.